Let's see if I can get you prepped. So as you know, there are three questions on the final exam. Excuse me, there are three questions that you're preparing for, and I'm asking two the day of the final exam. It's just like the midterm, all right? You prepare all of them, and then I choose which ones you're answering. The only difference from the midterm is that instead of an hour and 15 minutes, you'll have 2 hours and 30 minutes. So twice as much time for the final exam as you had for the midterm, all right? You will be writing everything out in longhand, in paragraph essay format, and you will be, let's see, yeah, you'll be answering both questions, okay? Now, let's see. So let's get started. The very first question, in the 19th century, Europe and America pushed into East Asia, with China and Japan having different reactions to the incursion. Describe the origins and consequences of European incursion into China and the American-European incursion into Japan. Excuse me. Can you pay attention up here, please? Put away your phone and your stuff. Now, what does this mean? How do you answer this question? All right? I've provided this answer key to give you a detailed outline of what it is that I'm looking for. But let me go through it with you so you have an idea what you're looking for. Now, first of all, where to find the information. Everything you need for question number 1 about East Asia is located in chapter 27 of your textbook. Chapter 27, which is entitled Modern East Asia. Now, you have a recorded lecture on the Modern East Asia chapter, which is available on YouTube, just like all the other recorded lectures. You have a PowerPoint presentation, which is available on Blackboard, just like you do for every other lecture. So between the recorded lecture, the PowerPoint presentation, the textbook itself, as well as the notes that you took when you were in class and your own readings, you have all the information you need to answer question number 1. So what does it specifically ask you to do? This is the detailed breakdown under the answer key of what I'm looking for. So describe the origins of Western imperialism in East Asia, which will include a description of the various reasons why China and Japan were so weak and unprepared for Western interference in their country, and why the West was so desirous of pushing into East Asia. What I'm asking for there is, look at your notes, look at all your sources, and the very first part of your answer, you have to outline for me, why were China and Japan such easy targets to be conquered? What was it about them that made them easy targets? What was weak about their economy, their military, their society? What was it about them that made them easy targets? Okay? Now, both China and Japan shared a lot of things in common that made them such easy targets, and there were some differences between China and Japan. So I want you to lay them all out. And once you've done that, then I want you to start focusing on, why did the Western countries, and by the West I mean Europe and America, why did they go seeking to economically penetrate both China and Japan? Okay? I know I'm recording this, but you all should be writing this down so you can actually remember this stuff, so you don't have to listen to all this later on. Now, so that is how you deal with the origins of this question. Why were China and Japan so weak? And there's multiple reasons. And then, why did the Western nations want to economically penetrate and dominate China and Japan? What was in it for them? Why did they do it? Now, once you've dealt with the origins of the European and American incursion into East Asia, now you got to deal with the consequences. Specifically, how did China and Japan deal with this foreign interference in their country? The Chinese and the Japanese responses were completely different. So for China, and this refers us to part B of the answer key, what wars did China fight against Western nations to defend its independence? What were the results of those wars? What kind of peace treaties were imposed on China? What were the consequences in China itself after it had been defeated and humiliated by these Western countries? How did the Chinese people react? China did attempt to modernize itself, to strengthen itself, to regain its independence. What was that movement called? How successful was it? And finally, what ended up happening to China by 1911? Roughly 100 years after the first European interference in their country and the Chinese attempt to strengthen, rebuild themselves to regain their independence, what ended up happening to that country by 1911? Once you've done with the consequences of Western interference in China, then you switch to the consequences of interference in Japan. Same thing that you did with China, you do with Japan. You start off with, what nation demanded entrance into the Japanese market? How did the Japanese react to this demand? The Japanese, like the Chinese, tried to strengthen themselves to regain their independence. This was called the Meiji Restoration. What was it about the Meiji Restoration? What is the Meiji Restoration? What were its goals? What did it want to do? How did it try to strengthen Japan in order to regain its independence? How successful was the Meiji Restoration? And finally, just like what you did for China, what was the condition of Japan in the early 20th century after about 60 years of trying to regain their independence from Western interference? What condition was Japan in by the early 20th century? And in that particular case, think about the wars that it fought, successfully for that matter. So take a look at question 1. Take a look at the answer key. Let me know if there's anything there that is not clear based on the original wording or my further explanation. Take your time, look at the question, look at the answer key. Remember, all the information will be in chapter 27 of your textbook, which I believe is entitled Modern East Asia. But really, there aren't a whole lot of chapters dealing with China and Japan in a textbook in the modern era, so it shouldn't be hard to find. you want to move on from question 1? Anyone else? Do you want to move on? Any objections? Okay. So, question 2. Remember, you prepare all 3. I will choose which 2 you will answer. Discuss the origins of World War I. Specifically, how did Europe become locked into 2 rival military alliances? How did the various Moroccan and Balkan crises raise European tensions? And how did the events of the summer of 1914 lead to war? So I'm asking for 3 specific things here. The first one, under the answer key, I'm asking you to discuss how did Europe become locked into 2 rival military alliances. So answer key A, discuss the formation of the Triple Alliance and Triple Entente, beginning with the German-Austrian Alliance of 1879 and ending with the Russian-British Agreement in 1907. What does this mean? Before 1879, all of Europe was not locked into 2 rival alliances. There was a few smaller alliances, some were long-term, some were short-term, but there was always 1 or 2 or 3 nations that were independent. They didn't want to get stuck supporting another nation in an alliance. They felt there was more risk to that than benefit. But by 1907, all the major nations had signed up into an alliance, thinking whatever risk was involved was better than being left alone in a Europe that looked like it was going to fall into war relatively soon. So, start off your story by explaining how did the first of all of these alliances take place, the German and Austrian alliance of 1879. Why did those 2 nations sign a firm military agreement saying, essentially, if you, my ally, go to war, I will always have your back? So that is the beginning of the Triple Alliance. How did Italy get brought into the Triple Alliance? Why did France and Russia sign an alliance in the 1890s?
Is that Russia?
France and Russia. Why did France and Britain sign an alliance or an entente in the early 20th century? And then finally, why did Britain and Russia sign an entente or agreement in 1907? So what you're doing is you're tracing from 1879 to 1907 how all the nations that formed part of the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente got into those alliances in the first place. So tell a story in chronological order, beginning in 1879 with the German-Austrian alliance, ending in 1907. How did each nation of each different alliance become locked into either the Triple Alliance or the Triple Entente? So if you don't know who's in the Triple Alliance and who's in the Triple Entente, that's the first question you have to answer for yourself. Now, the second part of that question says, how did the various Moroccan and Balkan crises raise the tensions between these 2 alliances? So, in order, you'll look at the Moroccan crisis of 1905, the Bosnian crisis of 1908, then you switch back to the Moroccan crisis of 1911, and then the Balkan Wars of 1912 and 13. In each 4 of those crises, which nation suffered humiliation in each case? So in each 4 of those situations, in order, the Moroccan crisis of 1905, the Bosnian crisis, which is taking place within the Balkan area of Europe, of 1908, the Moroccan crisis of 1911, and then the Balkan Wars of 1912 and 13, there was always one country that lost out. Okay? And because they lost out, they were determined never to suffer that form of humiliation again. Which meant when another crisis came in the future, they weren't going to back down so easily. Which is partly why World War I happened the way that it did. And then finally, question 2 says, how did the events of the summer of 1914 lead to war? To answer that, you are recounting the course of events beginning with the assassination of the Archduke on June 28, 1914, that led all the way to the outbreak of World War I. So for the final part of question 2, I'm asking you to narrate the Archduke of Austria-Hungary gets assassinated on June 28, 1914, by who? Who is that guy working with? What country? How does Austria react to this assassination? Who do they look to for help? How do the other nations become involved in what starts off as a very small local conflict between only two countries, but then sucks in all of Europe? Go ahead.
So my question is, until the war starts?
Until the war starts, not going into the war, but when the war starts, which is the very final nation that declares war is Britain. So once Britain declares war, then you can stop your answer, your narrative. Yeah. That is chapter 28, 2-8, which I believe is entitled Imperialism and World War I. When you are looking through that chapter for your answer to question 2, remember that chapter deals with imperialism, the conquest of Africa, as well as the origins of World War I. Don't waste your time narrating the series of events leading to the conquest of Africa, because that is not part of question number 2. Even though it's in chapter 28, don't simply put in information from that chapter that I'm not asking for. All right? Now, for this question number 2, for chapter 28, just like everything else, you have pre-recorded lectures already on YouTube, which you can access from Blackboard. You have PowerPoint presentations, which have been on Blackboard since the beginning of the semester. You've got your chapter readings. You've got the homework you've done for me. You've also got that essay you did for me on the origins of World War I. That is actually very helpful, specifically for what happened in the summer of 1914, what country helped who, when, in what order, that kind of stuff. You have a ton of resources to answer question number 2. All right? So take a look at question number 2. Take a look at question number 2. I can't show you the whole answer key because it's too big, but I'm assuming some of you have printed this out. So take a look at the question, take a look at the answer key. Is there anything there that is unclear what it is that I'm asking for? Does anybody want to stay on this question? Or if there are no further objections, I will continue to question number 3. Yes?
The objection is, so start from 28, stop at when it mentions Africa, correct?
No. Don't get into the part of chapter 28 that deals with the colonization of Africa, because I'm not asking about that. Unless you're going to make it part of the answer of why World War I broke out, essentially don't waste your time writing about the conquest of Egypt, the conquest of the Sudan, the conquest of South Africa, unless you're using that to say this directly made relationships between European countries much worse, which then helped lead to World War I. Okay? So leave the imperialism part of chapter 28 out of your answer. For this question number 2, focus on specifically what I'm asking for, which is detailed in the answer key. How did the alliances form? How did the relationships between the two alliances get worse and worse? And then what happened in the summer of 1914 that turned two tense alliances into World War I? Shall we move on?
Mm-hmm.
Question 3. Again, you are preparing all 3. I am choosing the 2 that you will be answering the day of the exam. Folks, you get that in the back? You prepare all 3. I ask which 2. All right? Don't guess. This is your final exam. It's worth 22.5 points. Guessing is the worst possible gamble. Now, in the 1920s and 30s, Europe fell into totalitarianism. What is it? What differentiates it from liberalism and democracy? Discuss how Russia, Germany, and Italy all became totalitarian dictatorships. Why did America not fall into totalitarianism? First things first. In the past, when I have asked this question, and I don't always ask it, when I have asked this question, people always forget to put in the America section. Maybe they get tired, maybe they forget, I don't know, but they do. But this question specifically asks you to talk about the United States in the 1930s. If you don't say anything about the United States in the 1930s, I can't give you any points for it. So make sure that you leave time in your preparation and in writing out the answer if I ask this question to fully answer the question. Now, how do you answer question 3? So under the answer key, part A, define totalitarianism, liberalism, and democracy from your textbook. Meaning, don't go onto Google and give me a generic definition. Go to your textbook, either read chapter 29, which defines these terms, and if you don't find it immediately, go to the back of the textbook, the index, look up the terms there, and then get a working definition for all 3. Totalitarianism, liberalism, democracy. And I'm talking about real definitions. I don't want to read totalitarianism is a system of government where the state has total control. Okay, what does that mean? What does total control mean? All right? Now, once you've defined liberalism, totalitarianism, and democracy, explain what makes them different. Remember that speech by Benito Mussolini, that article by Benito Mussolini you read for me and then you wrote the assignment on? That piece by Benito Mussolini specifically states that fascism, which is a type of totalitarian dictatorship, is different from liberalism because of this, is different from democracy because of this. You can use the Mussolini document. You shouldn't only use that, but you can use that one. After that, you talk about how Russia fell into a totalitarian dictatorship. This is part B of the answer key. Discuss Russian history from the origins of the Russian Revolution in 1917. Include the coming to power of the Bolsheviks and how Lenin and Stalin secured dictatorial control over their country. What does that mean? The Russian Revolution broke out in 1917, which brought the Bolshevik Party to power. Why did the Russian Revolution break out? What was wrong in Russia at the time? Once the Bolshevik Party of Vladimir Lenin took power, how did Lenin and then Stalin establish full control over their country? So talk about everything. The Russian Civil War. Talk about Stalin's plans to industrialize Russia and what he did to his political opponents. So that's how to answer the Russian part. Yeah?
Can I also mention that Stalin was in agreement with Hitler?
Again, if you can bring in that information in such a way that it answers this question, then do so. But don't just bring in random information.
No, it's not random. It's that he wanted to revolutionize Russia.
Again, if you can make that connection, feel free to bring it in. Okay? In order to answer the Italian part, which is part C of the answer key, discuss Italian history from the end of World War I and include the origins of fascism, how Mussolini came to power, and the steps he took to establish a dictatorship thereafter. What does that mean? What was the condition of Italy at the end of World War I? They were a country that won the war, but the people were dissatisfied. Why? What was going on in Italy that made people so unhappy and have so little faith in their liberal democratic form of government that made them susceptible to the ideas of fascism? From there, you go into the origins of fascism. Where did the fascist party come from? Who were the original members? What were they for? What were they against? Who were their enemies? How did Mussolini come to power in 1922? How did this guy how did the head of the fascist movement become the legal leader of Italy in 1922? What did he and his movement do to get that power? And then thereafter, and this is the part where students in the past have become lost or confused, you have to talk about the steps that he took to establish a dictatorship after 1922. Remember, Mussolini was given power legally. He wasn't a dictator in 1922, but he was by 1929, where he eliminates all civil and political rights. What did he do between 1922 and 1929, where he was able to wipe out parliament and democracy in Italy and become the fascist dictator of Italy? What did he do? What laws were passed? What did he do to his political enemies? What did he do to get the people to support him? When you get to Germany, you do roughly the same thing. Discuss, this is part D of the answer key. Discuss German history from the end of World War I. Include the economic and political problems Germany suffered from World War I. The role of the Great Depression in helping to bring Hitler to power, and the steps he took to establish a dictatorship in the 1930s. So, for the German part of question 3, you're going to look at what was the state of Germany at the end of World War I. They lost. The German people were quite unhappy. Be specific as to why. Talk about some of the economic problems Germany went through in the 1920s, which made people more susceptible to the Nazi message of Adolf Hitler and made them give up on liberalism, democracy. Mention specifically when the Great Depression hit in 1929, what happened to the German economy and how did the Nazi Party benefit? Now, Hitler, like Mussolini, was appointed legally the head or the chancellor of Germany in 1933. He wasn't a dictator in 1933, but he became a dictator by 1936-37. Well, let's just make it easy, 1939. So what did he do in the 1930s what did he do to his political enemies? How did he eliminate political rights, civil rights? How did he establish full, complete control over every aspect of Germany in the 1930s and become a dictator? And the final part of that question, answer key E, it's why did America not fall into totalitarianism? I'm asking specifically, answer key E, explain how the New Deal helped preserve capitalism and democracy in America. What I mean by that is, America was in crisis. There was a tremendous loss of faith in the American system of government. But the New Deal, as implemented by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, gave people enough confidence to keep giving democracy in America and liberalism a second chance. They did not entertain ideas of either communism or fascism. They continued to trust in the American democratic political system and capitalism. So what was the New Deal? Give me specific examples of New Deal programs that helped alleviate or at least give people confidence that the Great Depression was being solved or dealt with. So, take a look at question 3. Take a look at the answer key. Remember, this information comes from chapter 29. It's a long chapter, but everything you need is in chapter 29. So is there anything in question 3 that is unclear, or in the answer key that is unclear? Question 3, just like the other 2 questions that you're preparing, you've got the lectures, you've got recorded lectures, you've got the PowerPoint presentations, you've got your textbooks that you can read, you have the notes that you took when you were in class. You have a lot of resources for question number 3. Any questions about anything? About any of these questions? All right. Now, the very first thing you have to do is you have to make sure that you have all the resources. If you haven't downloaded the PowerPoints, make sure you do. If you don't have access to these recorded lectures, make sure you do. I think maybe you can download them as a podcast and stick it on your phone. I'm not sure. There's no restrictions on downloading that I put on there. If you don't have access to the textbook and you've been photocopying from the library reserve desk, make sure you have these chapters. Have all your information in front of you, and then start figuring out, do I actually have the information in order to build the answers to these questions? Most of you will have everything you need, but if you don't waste any time looking for this stuff on the weekend when the library is, you can't get to the library. Make sure you have everything now. Textbook chapters, PowerPoint presentations, access to the recorded lectures, your notes on your readings, your assignments that you've done for me. Make sure you have access to everything. And then start building your answer, bit by bit by bit. It may actually benefit you to just sit down and read chapters 27, 28, and 29, just from beginning to end. It'll take you a couple of hours, but you'll get a good overview of what's in there, and then you can dive in and pull out the specific information that these 3 questions ask of you. Any further questions?
How much time is the test?
2.5 hours. When you come in, you would have already been studying for quite some time. You're probably going to be a little tired. So for the first 15 minutes, I would sit down and write out in point form, not full sentences, but write out in point form everything you can remember of the 2 questions that you are about to answer on the day of the exam. Once you've written everything out in point form and outline, then you can settle in and start writing out the full sentence and paragraph answers for the 2 questions I'm going to give you. Try and write down everything in point form as soon as you sit down, because that'll be when you're most fresh. And then later, as you get more tired, you don't have to remember everything because you wrote down everything at the beginning. All right? Now you have 2.5 hours, so get here on time, and make sure to get here on time because you're going to be doing a lot of writing and you want to give yourself a break. Meaning, after you do question 1, the first question that I ask you, if you have to, you can put your head down and take a nap for 5 minutes, recharge, and then start writing out the second question or second answer that I ask you.